We're going to compare Calvinism and Arminianism because last week it came up like, well, what do Arminians believe? And I actually think, yeah, that's a good thing to address. We didn't actually go hardcore into that last year. We didn't. So I'm going to present to you Arminianism, and hopefully I do a good job of doing that. Whenever you make arguments, okay, I'm arguing for Calvinism, right? Like that's what we teach here. If you're going to argue for something, you better be able to understand the opposing position, and you have to present it in a fair and credible way. If you present it in a way that's not correct, or where an Arminian would say, I actually don't believe that, that's setting up false arguments, okay? And that's not a good way to debate. You need to be able to talk about what the other person believes. They need to be able to say, yes, I do believe that. You present your proofs, and then that's how you have good discussion. So this chart I got from the Christian Apologetics and Research Ministry, and they specifically state that they are not for Calvinism or Arminianism. They say that they try to be as balanced as possible. And they say that in their website, they have both Calvinists and Arminians write for them. Okay, so this is not like, Desiring God or Gospel Christian that is very Calvinist. This is hopefully a fair presentation. Okay, and what I want us to focus on specifically today are these two, because this is what we covered so far. Okay, doctrine of total depravity, doctrine of unconditional election. Total depravity, man is completely touched, affected by sin in all that he is. Okay, in nature, he's completely fallen, but is not as bad as he could be in action, right? Like, I don't murder people, so I'm not as bad as I could be, but in my heart, I'm totally depraved. Furthermore, this total depravity means that the unregenerate will not, of their own sinful free will, choose to receive Christ. And that really is the heart of it, right? Like, if I'm left to myself, I am not going to choose Jesus. I'm that stuck in the pit. I'm that dead. I'm that blind. I'm that deaf. Remember, I was using the Bible for that. Here's the Arminian view. Man is totally affected by sin and all that he is, but with the prompting of the Holy Spirit, the unbeliever is capable of freely choosing God. So the Arminians will not deny the sovereignty of God. They will say that God is totally sovereign. But then there is a caveat to that where it's like, well, when it comes to choosing Jesus, you still need to make that choice. Yeah, the Holy Spirit can prompt you to do it, but that's still on you to do it. And I think that's a fair way to state the Arminianist point. This is what we're going to talk about today, unconditional election. God elects a person. God chooses a person based upon nothing in that person because there is nothing in him that would make him worthy of being chosen. Rather, God's election is based on what is in God. God chose us because he decided to bestow his love and grace upon us, not because we are worthy in and of ourselves of being saved. Okay, so the Calvinist position is that, like, I did nothing to earn my salvation. There is no good in me, right? I'm this. But for some reason, God chose to love those whom he wants to save. The Arminian's point of view is conditional election now. Election to salvation is conditional upon God's foreseen faith in the person. So the Arminian will say, well, God actually foresaw that this person would make the decision to choose him, but that's what made God elect the person in the first place. So it's almost like a feedback loop there, where it's like God saw that you would choose him, so therefore you're elect. And I do think that's how I've read Arminians state that position. So you go on, right? Limited atonement versus universal atonement. Christ bore the sin of only the elect, not everyone who ever lived. Jesus bore the sin of all people, the elect and the non-elect. We'll talk about these in later weeks. But the heart of this question is, well, who did Jesus really die for? When Jesus died and bled on the cross, did he forgive everyone's sins at that point? And it all just depends on if you choose him, or did he only die for the elect, those whom are adopted into God's family, etc. And then you have irresistible grace versus irresistible grace, perseverance of the saints versus falling from grace. We're not going to read those, but the chart is here. I think we can possibly go through these later on as we go through these, but the first two are the most important for today. This is a book that I saw, and it's called Arminian Theology, Myths and Realities. So this is an Arminianist arguing for the Arminian viewpoint, and that person is saying that these are myths. And then I read a review from the Gospel Coalition that said, yes, these are true statements, how an Arminian would like to be represented, and what a Calvinist should be able to discuss with them. Okay, so a myth of Arminian theology is the opposite of Calvinist Reformed theology. So they're not actually opposites, right? They're nuances. They're nuances. You have to actually go into it. It's not a black and white comparison there. A hybrid of Calvinism and Arminianism is possible. So the Arminianist is arguing that actually you can't have both. You can't like pick and choose. To have a coherent train of thought, you have to actually choose sides. Here's another myth. Arminianism is not an orthodox evangelical option. And that's correct. Yeah. There are orthodox evangelicals that hold to Arminian theology. Okay, so I'm going to be honest with you. Like, yeah, sometimes I'm like, oh, in the past I'd be like, Arminian theology? That's not real Christianity. But that's wrong. That's totally wrong for me to say. You can't say stuff like that. Here's another myth. The heart of Arminianism is belief in free will. And when I read a review of this, okay, another Arminian who was saying, yeah, there's a good book. That person said, yeah, the starting point of Arminian theology is God's goodness, and that free will is a result of that goodness. So the Arminian will argue that, like, well, it's not actually on God's sovereignty, but it's on God's goodness. And God's goodness enables people to choose. So it's not like necessarily a good inside yourself, but it's a goodness of God that enables people to choose. Here's another one. Arminian theology denies the sovereignty of God. And this person was saying that, that's a myth. Arminians believe God has absolute power over all creation, but that he also has the power to give his creatures, human beings, freedom to make some real choices without threatening his overall plan and purpose for the world. So these are like kind of hard concepts to understand here, but I think it does help when you compare the two. Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but these are more myths. This is probably the most important one that I want to go over. Arminians do not believe in predestination. Okay, so the Arminian will say that they do believe in conditional predestination of individuals. God foreknows every person's ultimate and final decision regarding Jesus Christ, and on that basis predestines people to salvation or damnation. What Arminians deny is that God unconditionally and irresistibly elects some people for salvation and others for damnation. Okay, so just kind of put that in your mind. Okay, we're going to talk about that today. It's this word, this God foreknowing what people will choose. And that's where the hang-up is. Okay, this is probably one of the hardest things for Calvinists and Arminians to reconcile, is free will. And that was the heart of the question from last week. It was, well, how is it possible that somebody can choose God or not choose God? Like, why is that such a distinguishing point between the two? And I think that it is hard to understand. And so when I was looking at this, I did listen to a podcast this week, and R.C. Sproul put it this way. Now, R.C. Sproul is a Calvinist, so this is how he reconciles the two things about free will and God's sovereignty. And I think this makes sense. He says that free will is the ability to make choices within the constraints of one's sinful nature. So if you can agree that, yes, man is sinful in nature, meaning that we have fallen, when Adam and Eve sinned, then we inherited their condition, their sinful nature, then it is possible to have a free agent within that sinful nature. So being a free agent refers to making genuine, responsible choices within the framework of divine sovereignty. So it's sort of like, yeah, I'm a free agent, meaning I make my choices. I make my choice to move from here to over here. That is my individual choice. But my will to do that is still in sin. It's still a sinful thing that possibly, you know? Now that's a silly example, right? So let me try to give you a different example. If I have the ability to, like, okay, the unregenerate person, right? The unregenerate person, the non-Christian. The non-Christian, right, is supposedly sinful in nature. That person does not have the ability to choose good or evil apart from Jesus. And the reason I would say that is because, well, that person does not have Jesus. Everything that person does is still in the sinful nature, even if it might seem that there's no moral consequences to it. But just hold on to this, okay? Distinguish between having free will and being a free agent in the world. Free will is not actually like possible in a Christian concept because we are sinful in nature. Our wills are in bondage to sin. We are slaves to sin. That's the verses that I presented to you last week. Okay, question.
So what about like slaves?
Yeah.
They would say that they're like sinful.
Right.
Still have it.
Yeah. So yes, I would say that the Christian, I don't think that we're like necessarily as sinful in nature, if I'm going to describe it in these terms, but the Bible talks about putting on Jesus, put on his righteousness, like wear it, and you have things like the armor of God, righteousness, all these things, right? You put that on. So it is possible for you to kind of revert back to a sinful nature, sort of, but the true Christian won't go all the way like back into that, that'd be impossible because our hearts are new. Right? Maybe that's the thing I need to hit upon, is that, remember I presented these verses about like how our heart is totally corrupt, is sinful in nature. God needs to give us a new heart, a heart of flesh versus a heart of stone, right? We're blind and we can't unblind ourselves. God needs to open our eyes to that, right? I won't deny the fact that like we sin, right? We say that all the time, But for somebody to like blatantly live in sin, I wouldn't say that's like going back to sinful nature. I'd be like, oh shoot, like I don't even know if that person's a Christian to begin with. Like if that person is regenerated by God. Yeah.
So having free will is to be able to make your own choices, and then what is free will?
Yeah. Okay. So the free will would mean that like you don't have like sinful nature. You would actually be able to go back to like Adam and Eve, like their ability to choose. Like, yeah. I would. That's how I would say it.
And then what is a free agent?
A free agent means that you do make your own choices, right? You are responsible for things that you do in life. But if you're unregenerate, your will is not like able to choose what you want or what God would want. Yeah.
So we don't have free will.
Right. Yeah. yeah. If I'm gonna be straight up, yeah, we don't. Yeah, we don't. If you're gonna put it like black and white, yeah, we're sinful. Our will is enslaved to sin. Yeah.
The Arminians believe in free will.
They believe in free will in the sense where like, well, when it comes to your salvation, you still get to make that choice of if you're gonna choose God or not. Where the Calvinist believes that in order for you to make that choice, God needs to elect you and change your heart to do it. Good questions, guys. This is good. I'm glad that we can actually flesh this out a little bit more.